Welcome to this developer talk, how to create a localization payroll structure. My name is Yannick Tivis, and today I want to show you how easy it is to develop yourself a complete payroll localization for your own country with the Odoo payroll engine. Rather than diving straight into a technical part of the talk, I would like to begin by presenting what's new in the version from the version 13 functionally and technically. Then I would like to show you how the flow has become simple and efficient with a quick peek at the basic flow. With all those information in mind, it will be time to explain you what are the different models behind the scene and why are they used for, and then explain you how you could define those different objects as data in your own module to make it work for your country while relying on the payroll engine that we developed. The goal is to show you how to implement a fully functional payroll localization only by defining data. At the end of this talk, I will explain how you can contribute to the Odoo project by developing a localization for your own country, and I should have more or less than 10 minutes to answer to your questions. So don't hesitate to put your questions on the chat. And if you don't have the opportunity to ask your question at that time, I invite you to speak privately with me on the discussion room afterward. Let's start with the basics and see what's new from the version 13. Globally, the human resource applications have been neglected during the last years because the main target of the Odoo business was the small and medium enterprises, or SME. So, as we were targeting companies between 1 to 50 employees, it was not the first priority to develop those modules as they were not really ready to pay for a fleet management application, for instance. Now, much more companies with more than 50 employees are starting to have a deep interest in Odoo, which makes the need to improve the HR applications more important. On the other hand, as the number of Odoo employees is strongly increasing since a few months and years, it's not a big surprise that we have created a new team working full-time on the HR applications. So all those modules have been really improved during the last 2 years, and I invite you to come in the discussion rooms to see what's new. So, what is the new Odoo payroll? Functionally, a lot of improvements have been made. For the people who knew the payroll module from 2018 to 2018, nothing has been really done to improve it. We improved the way we define the payroll structure. Before, a contract has to be linked to a payroll structure, for example, the regular pay. If you needed to use a new structure, for example, to compute the end of the year bonus, you had to try creating a batch and you were never sure you were doing it right. But now a contract should only be linked to a payroll type, which is regrouping several structures into it, and computing specific payslips has been made much more easy. We implemented new dashboards to retrieve interesting data as the average net wage, the number of employees, the absenteeism rate, and so on, and this on a given period. We improved the way we defined the payroll structure. Before, there was a complicated parent-children relationship between the root structure and the children, and it was quite complicated to define new structures because it causes a lot of functional issues. If you wanted to post the journal entries on the payslips, and even with a single company environment. Before, it was also complicated to know how many worked days were done by the employees. In fact, it had to be computed manually and written down in the payslip form, which was not acceptable for a payroll management software. On the other hand, the payroll officer had to switch between the time of application and the payroll application to check that all the time of requests were correctly handled before counting the numbers of work days. And that's the reason why we introduced a new employee scheduler mechanism to manage all those aspects in a single page. We developed more tools too, mainly for the Belgian localization that can be backported on the basic payroll modules if it could be needed in another country. For example, the meal vouchers management, the attachment of the salary. So it means a part of the salary that is deducted before you get paid if you don't pay your bills or whatever. The postponement of the leaves to the next year, etc. Finally, sometimes the rules use parameters that can vary over time. That's the reason why we also developed a versioning mechanism to retrieve the correct values depending on the payslip period dates. Technically, the models have been refactored. For example, we removed the parent-children hierarchy on several models, as I said just before. We also worked to make the computation easy and scalable for big batch of payslips. The result of this complete refactoring is mainly a huge performance improvement. We computed the employee schedulers for more than 500 employees on the Odoo database, created the payslips and computed them by taking all the Belgian laws into account, while posting the accounting entries, and this in a few seconds during our last tests, which is largely better than before, as it was also not possible. Also, we modified the payroll engine by defining small methods, easy to override, to add your own methods into the evaluation context of the rules if you wish to develop advanced and complicated computation rules. Now, it's time to show you how the flow has become simple and efficient. When you jump on the employee scheduler view, this is the kind of things that you could face in real life. Here, all the records are generated on the fly when landing on a period, here a month. If you go back in time, the work entries would be generated automatically. It allows you to recreate all your payslip history in batches if you install the payroll application after using Odoo over a long time. Here you see that the sick time off has already been approved for Mitchell admin. You can see that all the employees are working on a 5 days per week basis, and if an employee has a part-time contract, you would see that the weekends are empty and also the periods in which the employee is not supposed to work. You can spot some yellow arrows on the boxes. It means that those periods are in error. For example, it could mean that a time of request has been created for an employee and is not validated or refused yet. For those use cases, the system cannot decide himself what to do. So the payroll officer has to take the decision and to confirm the time off or not according to their own internal policy. When clicking on a card in error, you get a pop-up with information about this period, a link to the time of request if you need to modify it, and 2 shortcuts to approve or refuse the time off in a single click. Let's say that we approve all the requests in our case. Now that the time off are approved and that we don't have any conflict anymore, a button Generate Payslip is available to compute all the employee payslips in a single batch. As you can see, we have a batch with 7 payslips. You can see the button on the top of the form. The payroll officer can check them to see if everything is okay from the button that is highlighted on the form. The payroll officer may want to validate them one by one or all at once. On the payslip, you can find the covered period, a link to the employee contract, a link to the payroll structure used to compute it. Here it is a regular pay. You can see 2 fields on the notebook, so the worked days and the other inputs. Worked days is populated automatically according to the employee schedulers, so you can see 17 days of classic attendances and 4 days of annual time off coming from the time off request that we validated just before. On the workdays model, you have several fields that you can use on the salary rules: the type, the description, the number of days, the number of hours, and the amount. In our case, an annual time off is a paid time off, so it won't have any effect on the net salary, but you can configure time off types to decrease the basic salary for this given month. On the other hand, you can also add additional inputs, like expense reports or a salary attachment that will also have an effect on the net salary. There is only 2 fields for this model: the description and the amount. Next, on the second notebook page, you can see all the payslip lines that were computed from the scheduler view. You may also want to adapt them manually before creating the accounting entries and confirming the payslip. Once validated, the PDF report is generated and the job is done actually. And if you use the Documents application, all the employees will be able to retrieve their own payslips from this interface. Here, on the Documents application, as a payroll officer, I have access to all the payslips, and it's quite useful to find a document. And last but not least, the reporting dashboard. In this dashboard, you can analyze a lot of information month by month or on average, like the net wage, the number of payslips, the number of unforeseen absence, the absenteeism rate, and use the pivot view on the button to make a deep analysis of all these pieces of data. What we have just seen is only the basic flow. A lot of new features are available. For example, you may want to report your expenses into the payslip to reimburse directly the employee with the monthly pay. It's also possible to export a SEPA payment to pay directly all your employees in a single time. There are also Belgian-specific features like the company cars management in the payslip rules, as we have to pay taxes by using a car provided by the employer. There is the salary configurator application that we extended to other countries. It is now, from the 14th version, possible to define your own salary configurator only from the interface. There is also the credit time management, which allows the employees to switch to a part-time employment contract when the employee becomes a parent, for example, and so on. Now, let's speak about the different models in the payroll application. The first one is the structure type. It's the global object defining your payroll localization. For example, it could be France, classic employee. In Belgium, we have developed the CP200 structure, which covers most of the employees of the country except the employee of the state, the doctors, the nurses, and other specific jobs. On this model, you can define the pay recurrency. Is it daily? Is it monthly? Quarterly? You can define the default working time calendar. 38 hours per week, for example. It's possible for an employee to have a specific schedule, but globally, all the employees will follow this calendar. You can define the way an employee is paid. It is based on the worked hours. For example, like a construction worker, or based on a worked month. And finally, you can also choose the structure to use as a regular pay, as a structure type may have several structures like the end of the year's bonus, the double holidays, etc. Here, for the CP200 for the Belgian employees that we defined for Belgium, it cannot be used for another company because it was specified only for the Belgium. It's computed every month with a fixed monthly wage, and by default, a period in the standard 38 hours per week calendar will create an entry in the employee scheduler as a classic attendance. Now, the second model of interest. It is the payroll structure. A structure, for example, the regular pay, contains all the rules that could or should be computed to create the payslip lines and the name that will be given to this payslip. You can also decide that the work days are taken into account or not. For example, for the end of the year bonus, we don't really care about the work days during the last months of the year. And then those information should not appear on the payslip. You can also define which work entry types. It means the type of the box on the employee scheduler won't be taken into account into the net salary. For example, the unpaid leaves or the unforeseen absences. Finally, you can define specific inputs that will be added by default on the payslip when being generated. But what could be an additional input? As additional inputs, we could have several payslip information, like for the termination fees. Understand by that the last payslip that you get when you get fired. You can add specific inputs to compute correctly the break-off compensations. So if you had a line with the correct code, the amount you set on this line will be used to compute the payslip. But it is in that case purely structure specific, and if you want to manage more inputs, you have to modify an existing rule or create a new one. As you can see, the payslip lines computation rules are not so easy to understand for a classic regular pay. There are a lot of lines, a lot of code. You can just remember that Belgium is known for its production of chocolate and waffles, but also has the distinction of having the highest income tax rate in the world, with an average income tax of 40%. On the other hand, several absences types are marked as unpaid, like the maternity time off or the long-term sick leave. Now that we know that a structure type can have several structures and that a structure can have several computation rules, what can we say about those rules? On a rule, you can define a code like federal taxes, a name, a category, is it an allowance, is it a deduction, and so on. You can also choose to display the payslip line in the PDF report or not. You can define the conditions to apply the rule or not, and also the rules to compute the amount of the payslip line. You can also choose an accounting journal on which to post the accounting entries and specify a contributor. For example, the social contribution is paid to the ONSS in Belgium, and the meal vouchers are paid to the meal vouchers provider, and so on. And it allows you to produce reports of what you have to pay to whom. About the application rule, there are different ways to do it. The rule can be always applied. It could be based on a field or a particular range. For example, if the basic salary is between 0 and 100, apply my rule. That could be an employment bonus to decrease the taxes for the employee with a low salary. If the first two ways to apply a rule are not sufficient for a complex condition, you can still define the application rule with a chunk of Python code executing using the safe-eval method, but I will come back on this point later. About the payslip line amount computation, there are also several ways to define it. Either it's a fixed amount, either it's a percentage based on the field, example 13% of the gross salary, or it could be computed by a Python code defined on the rule. And about the quantity of the line, you can put what you want, an amount or a Python code. For example, here, the social contribution to the state is always applied on the payslip and is equal to 13.07% of the salary, which is the code of another payslip rule with a lower sequence, so computed before this one. And as I said, you see that the contributor is the ONSS, and this amount is paid to this organism. I told you that the chunks of Python code were computed magically, and it's now time to see together how it works. For example, the field to compute the payslip line amount is named amount Python compute. It's a char field, and it's evaluated using the method safeEval with an evaluation context which is named localDict. If the safeEval method is done without any problem, the result, the quantity, and the rate, as you can see on the chunk of code, is retrieved from this localDict and set on the payslip line. But what do we have in this local dictionary? The dictionary is composed of three main elements. The first one is a basic local dictionary with the allowed methods in the evaluation context. The second one is more complex and contains elements that we will discover one by one during this talk. And the last one is the result parameters containing the values to report on the payslip line. Okay, so the first one, as I said, this block is very simple and it's only containing a pointer to a classic Odoo method to round an amount. So why did we make a method just for that? It's because we want to provide an easy way to add other methods in this dictionary. For example, the formula to compute the withholding taxes is so complicated in Belgium that most of the people use a grid provided by the state instead of using the formula. In Odoo, we implemented this complex formula and allowed the method to be called in this safeEval dictionary. The other advantage of this is the following. A lot of Belgian structures apply the same withholding tax computation rules. In that way, the code is defined only one time instead of in all the different structures using it, which is obviously a good practice. Also, if you have to make a fix in this complex rule, it allows you to apply the patch only by restarting the server, because if it was defined in data, you would have to update the module itself to apply the correction. So, in your own localization modules, you can also define a specific method to allow it on the evaluation context. The second element, as I said, is more complex and use the concept of browsable object. What is a browsable object? It is initialized for an employee ID. It takes a dict element and the environment. All those parameters are bound on the browsable object and can be retrieved. It also offers support to retrieve an element from the dict directly by doing object.foo if the foo element exists in this structure, for example, a dictionary or a browsed record. So, what is the added value of such a structure then, if it's mostly the same thing than a browsed record? In fact, it's not the same thing, because we can define more information on it. For example, we can, at each payslip line, add information on the dictionary. Let's take the example of the categories. The browsable object is initially an empty dictionary, as you can see on the definition. But on each computed payslip lines, we will add this amount to the rule category total. So you know that when computing a rule, the element in the browsable object will correspond to the temporary total amounts for all the different category codes applied on the payslip. Then, in your salary rules, when defining the amount for a payslip line, you can use some syntactic sugar, like result equal categories.basic plus categories.allowance. In our case, we define that the gross salary is equal to the basic salary without all the allowances in the payslip lines. This is quite straightforward and allows you to make simple rules only in data. The same applies for the rule elements, which is also an empty dictionary at the beginning of the computation. each time a payslip is computed, the dictionary will be updated with the applied rule code. So if you want to apply a certain amount only if another rule has been applied on the payslip, you can define the amount as result equal 20 if child in rules, else 10. Also, it's quite easy. And so it's for the rules. And now for the payslips, the browsable object is not an empty dictionary like the previous two elements at the beginning, because it's the payslip itself. So at its current state during the line computations. It also offers additional method like sum or sum category. It allows you to aggregate the amounts of all the payslip lines with a given code for the employee on a given period. For example, here on the small code on the right, here we retrieve all the net salaries for all the payslip of this employee. It's sometimes used in the Belgian localization to know what has been earned during the last year. Sum category does nearly the same, except that we target a category like the allowances instead of a specific rule code. You can also use the rule parameter method. From the parameter code you provide, it will search the correct value for this parameter according to the payslip end date in the hr.rule.parameter table. But what is a HR rule parameter? As I a little bit explained at the beginning of this presentation, we developed a versioning mechanism in the payroll management module. This parameter is a constant used in a salary rule that may have different values over the time. Example, the child allowances. In Belgium, some parameters are modified every 3 months, for example, and then this mechanism is very useful to create a payslip for an arbitrary period while being sure that the computed payslip lines are correct for this period. Okay, let's say that we only want to apply an employment bonus if the gross salary is under a given amount that may differ over time. Then we could write result equal categories.brut. Remember that the categories browsable object can be used to retrieve the temporary total for a category, less than or equal to my parameter work bonus reference wage I. So as you can see, it's possible to make complex things only by defining data. And the last specificity of the payslip browsable object is the paid amount property. As you know, we can define certain unpaid time off on a structure. Using this property allows you to retrieve the basic salary, so the actual wage minus the unpaid amount, only by using result equal payslip.paid amount. And the last browsable object is the worked days and the inputs. Those elements are browsable objects with two additional methods, sum and sum hours, as for the payslips. It's a dictionary with a code as key and the line as value. For example, on the worked days model, there is a field number of days. So if you wish to retrieve the number of work days with the code work 100, you can simply write worked days dot work 100 dot number of days. On the input model, there is a field amount that you can use using the following: result equal inputs dot year-end bonus dot amount if inputs, else 0. So it's simple, right? And the last two elements are not browsable objects, but simple browsed records of the employee and the contract. So you can use them classically without any magic, like result equal 100 if employee.children, else 200. And now, let's go back to the local dictionary. The last element of the local dict are local variables related to the payslip line result. You probably noticed that we often set a variable result on the rules computation formula. In fact, for each payslip line, the default value is result equal none, result quantity equal 1, and result rate equal 100. And by the way, a Python rule can set all those three variables for a payslip line like the following. For example, category is dot termination double for the result. The rate could be a number between 0 and 100, or even more if you wish, but it's quite strange. And the result quantity could be a formula that will be evaluated by this feval. So now that we have seen the different models and also what they look like in the interface, now that we have seen the different tools to compute rules in all the possible ways, I will show you how to declare those elements in data. So most of the time it will be XML files and maybe sometimes CSV files. I will take some example from the Belgian localization to summarize everything we said today. Remember, we have a structure type, the first model that we saw today. It's the master model with a name, CP200 Belgian employee, default calendar, which is a calendar with 38 hours per week, and a country. Here it's the Belgium, and it will hide the structure type to the other companies that are not based in Belgium. Second model was the structure. For example, here we define the monthly pay. So it has a name, a country, like the structure type that we just defined. The structure is a regular pay, so you can link the different work entry types that will reduce the basic salary if time-offs of these types have been validated during the payslip period. For example, the long sick leaves. So we saw the structure type, the structures, now the salary rules. Here we have a salary rule belonging to the category miscellaneous taxable with a name, a code. The name is l10n internet, the code is a code, a sequence in the payslip lines. So the lowest the sequence, the first it will be chosen to compute the rules. The application rule is defined in Python and is applied only if the employee contract has the field internet that is set. So you can see that the field condition Python is completed and we say result equal Boolean value of the internet value. The amount computation is computed with the Python code, which is 5. Note that we could have set amount select to fixed instead of code, as the amount is in fact a fixed amount. And the rule is on the last line linked to the structure to be able to know what lines apply on what structure. Here there is another salary rule example. Here you can see that we use the method compute special social cotizations on the field amount Python compute. So this method doesn't exist in the evaluation context, and that's the reason why we had to override the first element of the local dictionary to add this method along with the float round method. By the way, you should be careful about one thing. By default, when you create a new structure, you already have 3 default rules. The first one is the basic salary and is equal to the paid amount, which means the wage minus the unpaid amount. The second rule is the gross salary, which is equal to the basic salary plus the allowances. And finally, the net salary, which is equal to the gross salary minus the deductions and understand, in that case, the taxed amount. So, if your payroll structure needs to define one of those rules, don't recreate those lines. Prefer to override them and keep the same code, basic, gross, and net. It will maintain a valid reporting in your dashboard, and it will allow to avoid doublons in the payslip lines. As a conclusion, what have we learned today? First, the payroll management application is much more mature since the version 13 and can be used efficiently in a real company. By the way, the reason why we developed a whole Belgian localization is mainly to use the payroll internally at Odoo. In Belgium, the payroll is so complex that nearly all the companies are calling a partner like SD-Works, for example, to manage the payroll for them. So, big companies are hiring experts internally to manage it and lessen the cost of such a service. It looked like a good challenge for us to develop an easy way to avoid those costs for SMEs by using a software as Odoo. Second, we discovered that all the models that are used to compute a valid payslip and how to configure yourself, your localization by using only data, and maybe additional Python methods if you wish to implement something very complex. And now, if you are interested and if you are thinking about contributing, that means that you will develop a full localization and asking to integrate it in the standard code base. Be conscious that by doing so, your module is under our responsibility concerning the maintenance when we refactor the models or modify the API, for example. On the other hand, it implies less customization for your customers. So you can contact me if you wish to contribute. My email is yti@odoo.com and open a pull request on GitHub with your module proposal. It should be included into a module starting with l10n code_HR_payroll module. Try to be generic, only data for this salary structure or new computation methods. And you may propose new features as well, like reports, new fields on the contract, etc., that will be validated by internally by our product owners team. Thanks a lot for your help, and thanks for watching me. Don't forget that all the slides of the presentation will be uploaded on our website. And as we still have some time, I'm here to answer to your question, and I hope that you got time to put your question on the chat. Thank you. Okay.
Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for this live Q&A about the localization of payroll. Thank you, Yannick. That was a great talk.
Thank you.
So we have a few questions, but please don't hesitate to keep asking them because we have a little bit of time. So I'll start with the oldest question. Can you set up a contract for a per day employee and so that they can work as many days as they want and you don't have conflict?
Yeah. So in fact, there are two ways to configure a contract. Either you say that the pay is monthly, quarterly, whatever, based on a period, or you can also configure it to say that the pay is based on a hourly basis. So you can say, for example, for a student, you can say that he is going to be paid 10 euros per worked hour. So if you define on the work entries the periods in which the employee actually worked, in the payslip it will be taken into account, and you will see on the workday lines that he has worked, for example, 54 hours during 6 days, and it will be taken into account in the payslip. And if you configure the contract by saying that he's working usually 9 hours per day, for example, you can in that case retrieve the number of days that the employee worked. So it's totally possible.
Perfect. So someone was saying that they don't see the payroll app in our pricing page. I can answer that one, but I'm going to leave it to you.
Yeah, actually the payroll application is not in the pricing because it's considered as free. So as the payroll application only uses the mail module and the employee module and the contract, it means that if you just have the employee application, you can use the payroll, and so you can also benefit from the one app free pricing on the official Odoo.com page. So it's not in the pricing because in fact it's free.
It's as Yannick said, it's part of the employee package. So, does the software support overtime pay, and can you set different ratio of overtime pay, like basic pay times 1.5 or basic pay times 12?
So in fact, it's not implemented in the payroll engine because it's not linked, it's not generic, it's not the same rules in all the countries. For example, it could be an internal policy, or it could be a legal law that forces the employees to be paid maybe twice if they worked more than the supposed working times. So what you can do is to define a rule in your localization in which you say, okay, the extra hours will be paid twice, or even generate an allocation request to give more leaves to the employee. So it's possible to do it with the payroll engine, but there are no rules that defines that. And there is also another thing that we want to do. We would like to make a bridge between the attendance application, so you know the check-in, check-out when you use your badge, and the payroll. So if you come at 7 o'clock and you leave at 80 instead of 70, in that case you have worked one more hour, and we would like to implement rules in the payroll application for which you could define what is the what you are gonna do with these extra hours. But it's not in the 14 version, it's in development and it's not done yet. So it will be possible to integrate this with the attendance application, and it's also possible to do it manually in the salary rules if you define the rules for that.
Just a quick reminder, keep asking questions in the chat. We still have quite a bit of time. Next question, do we have a time frame for the localization in the United States, for example?
There are currently no intention to develop the localization for the United States, but if a partner or if the Odoo company in the United States wants to use it internally, it's possible to define it, to develop this localization, but we need help in that case because we don't know the laws, and you are certainly the best partner, the best reference to know what we have to do. So if you wish to have an American localization, don't hesitate to contact me at the email address yti@odoo.com, and we will see together what's possible to do.
I assume that would be kind of the same answer for every other country.
Yeah,
Italy.
Yeah, that's the reason why I made a slide at the end of the presentation to explain how you could contribute. So don't hesitate to contact me, and then we will discuss together, see what you need, see if you need more features that we are not aware of and that doesn't exist in the payroll application yet. And surely it's possible to develop a new localization for your country.
And if they develop a new localization, they get like the salary configurator and all of that?
Yeah, for example, the salary configurator at the beginning was defined only for the Belgium. So before it was impossible to have this. The only way to do it was to develop another salary configurator. For those who are not aware of what's the salary configurator, if you go to the Odoo.com page for the Belgium jobs, you can see a simulation of what salary you could expect given the advantages that you can choose. For example, the internet subscription or a company car. So if you wish, you can also use the salary configurator for your country. You just need to define the advantages, and it's possible to do it on the interface, and the salary page will be generated according to the advantages that you asked or the personal information that you need to actually record a new contract. So it's right, if you define localization for your country, you could also benefit of the configuration, the salary configurator too for your employees.
I'm a big fan of the salary configurator. I love
Thank
it.
you.
Do we have a roadmap about payroll features?
Actually, everything is in the official release notes, and according to the for the roadmap, we are trying to develop the Belgian localization to use it internally. So currently, we are developing a lot of edge cases that were not managed directly by the basic engine. So what we developed, for example, we developed the fact that we can index the salaries when we start a new year. So you can increase the salary by 2%, for example. It's possible also that when you make the closure at the end of the month, an employee takes time off, for example, because he's sick. And in that case, you need to report it to the state, for example. We developed a new feature to be able to report it to the next month and also report this to the states. So we are improving a little bit the payroll, and there are a lot of things that we still need to develop to make it work for all the difficult cases that we could face in Belgium. For example, on the roadmap, we have this, the fact that we can report leaves. It has been merged in the 14.1 version, so the next SaaS version. Another thing that we developed is that it's possible now to have negative payslips. For example, the employee doesn't work because, I don't know, the employee is on a maternity leave. It doesn't work, but he still benefits of his company car. And in that case, there is a tax to pay to the states, and the payslip is in fact negative. What we can do in that time, it's that when you will create a new payslip for the employee, and if its payslip is positive, we will propose to report the negative amount, because in Belgium, for example, you can't ask for the employee to give money. So it's reported to the next payslip. What are we gonna do too? It's possible in Belgium that you have a an employee coming from a foreign country who's working there. So he's paid in a company in Belgium, but it's sometimes taxed in the welcoming country, so Belgium, but also in the outgoing country, so for example, Brazil. And so we are developing the fact that an employee can work in another country and still have to pay taxes in several countries, or only one, or no country at all. So it's also on the roadmap. Another thing on the roadmap is that it's quite difficult to have a clean overview on all the employee contracts. For example, each time you sign a new contract because you get a salary increase, we create a new contract, and it's difficult to see what was the history from when to when was the contract. And we are developing a new reporting view in which you can see the contract in its current state, but also all the history behind that. And it's quite useful for people who are taking a credit time. I don't know if it's the generic term in all the countries, but in Belgium, it means that you still are working on a full-time basis, but during a certain amount of time, you will work only, I don't know, 90% of the time. And it's not a new contract, it's an adaptation of the contract. And with this, you will be able to track in which state the contract is, and when he is going to work full-time again, etc., etc. So it's also on the roadmap. So there is also on the roadmap the fact that we could make a bridge between the attendance module and the payroll to record the extra hours and pay more or less, or create an allocation request and whatsoever. Okay.
Lots of things.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I got this question exactly right, so I'm sorry if I mess it up a little bit. How can you manage conflict on employees that work varying days?
Okay, So if I understood the question correctly, you have an employee with a working schedule. For example, he works on Monday and Tuesday, but sometimes it's varying. And so when generating the work entries, you will have the attendance at that moment, and maybe he started later and he ended later also. So in that case, you can use the Gantt view to just drag and drop the work entries and modify the hours, or you can update it manually. And also, if you record those times, you will have two work entries with one in conflict, and in that case, you have just to archive the first one. So I agree that you have to do it manually, but if on the working schedule of the employee you just said that he works 0 hours per week, and if you just tweak a little bit the attendance module to create a work entry at the checkout, for example, it will be possible in that case to generate the work entries directly according to the check-in, checkout. But in that case, there is also a downside. It's that if the employee forgets to check in or check out, maybe you will have inconsistent states that you will have to manage manually too. But it's not difficult in that case to, when you just check out, it's a single method that is called. So no work entries are going to be generated, and at the checkout, when we call the checkout method, you just record a new work entry for this employee. So normally it should work correctly.
Perfect. Can you create a payroll module without using Python code for the rules?
In fact, it's already possible, because you can say my basic salary is at $5,000, I don't know, and the first rule is, okay, the tax is 13%, and you can define this rule without having to write Python code. So you can define a lot of things just with simple rules. But it's true that if you want to make complicated things like the withholding taxes in Belgium, the Python code is more than 60 lines of code, and it's quite complicated according to the employee configuration. In that case, that's true that you have to define Python code, but I think it's the correct way to handle this, because it's difficult to make conditional things like that. But you could also, for example, if you have a big barim, is it the correct word? When you have a list and we say, okay, if the wage is this value, we tax at this value, you can define as many rules as you have elements in your list with a range. And you will say, okay, between 2,000 and 2,010 euros, I will use this tax. And in that case, instead of defining the rule for the withholding tax in Belgium, as we did, you could have more than 1,000 rules that are just defined with this range. And in that case, it's possible to do it correctly. And before, that was how we implemented the withholding taxes in Belgium. So there were no Python code, only a range min, range max, and the value in which you tax. But it's a little bit complicated when you have to update those rules every year, because with the HR rule parameter that I explained on the video, you can just change 3-4 parameters and the formula is updated for the new year. And you just have to create 4 new records instead of having to update more than 1,000 rules. But it's possible.
Perfect. Can you and how would you calculate the number of months between the start date of a contract and today's date in a salary rule?
Yeah, so as I said, the Python code is evaluated using the local dictionary, and in this you can put whatever the method that you wish. We only use a float round to round an amount. I think that date time and date is also included in the local dic, but you can do it yourself. And then to compute the number of months between 2 dates, it's just using the date time tools to just compute this. So it's not complicated. If you grep on Google compute date duration between 2 dates with date time in Python, you will have a lot of answers on Stack Overflow explaining how to do this.
So I'm pretty sure I know this one, but I will ask you to be 100%. Do we have any plan to implement automatic appraisal, which will automatically create a new contract?
So it's already the case with the salary configurator. So if you decide what is the new amount that you are willing to give to the employee, you can generate a link. The employee receives this link. It opens the salary configurator page, in which it could be static if you don't want to add advantages that can influence the contract. And then when the employees agree with it, he can click on submit, and then there is a PDF that he can sign, and in which the boxes could be pre-filled with the correct values. So if you want to do this with the appraisal, you just have to generate a new link, and the employee can sign it, and then it's done, without a lot of configuration behind it.
And I think this will be our last question. Can you convert overtime into holiday? In some countries, you cannot
Yeah. So it's in the roadmap, actually. We would like to do this, and maybe we will have to backport this feature in the 14 version because we need it internally. But yeah, it's a good idea because it's possible in Belgium if you work during the weekend according to the type of your job position. It's possible to convert extra hours into allocation requests, and I think it's a good idea. It's in the roadmap, and we will see if we develop it. But it's possible to make a custom wizard to do it.
Perfect. Thank you, Yannick. So if you have any questions about localization, or you want to work on localization with Odoo, please feel free to contact Yannick at yti@odoo.com. Thank you again for your talk.
Thanks, and have a nice day.
See ya.